I'm so excited to welcome Jonathan Williams back for his encore Virtual Insight Summit speaking slot. If you were here last year, you may have heard him then. He's going to be talking about something very different this year, but we're super excited to have him on board. It's been really fun seeing everyone who was here last year and is returning again for something more new, different, and experimenting along with us, because this is as new for us as it is for the rest of you. So this studio session is talking about Scrappy research methods. The goal is that at the end of this, you'll be able to better understand and map underutilized, counterintuitive, or creative sources of data to reveal a fuller, deeper customer understanding. We're going to be talking about bootstrapping, which is the concept of acting as if you have no budget, even if you have some. And really thinking outside of the box, which hopefully if you were just in the brain break with us, your brain will be very ready to do because you had some time to move and stretch and pulse your arms up and down a lot. And now you can get those brain muscles really going. So we're going to start with a high level sort of overview from Jonathan. He has some fun ways to engage you in that. Then we're going to go into breakout rooms. If you were with us this morning, if you're familiar with Zoom breakout rooms, you know that process. Otherwise, I'm going to sort of talk you through what that's going to look like a little bit. You'll have a group leader in each of those sessions who is from the Zapier Voxpop Me team who will talk you through an exercise, and you'll be able to really grapple with this on your own and with your team before coming back together to share those learnings with everyone else who's on the line. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jonathan, who will get us started.
Thank you very much. Yes, lovely to see everybody here. Thank you for joining. It's great to be here, and I'd just like to say thank you to the team at Zappy and Voxpop Me for setting up this session, but also inviting me back. It's great to be here. So I say I'm Jonathan, founder of Discover AI, and I'm going to talk to you about Scrappy research tactics. We had a bit of a sort of 1990s revival in the music, if anybody who got here a bit earlier, I think, which was very exciting. And that segues quite nicely into my sort of little intro to this session, which I think has a 1990s revivalist theme. But I've got a bit of a question for people. I'm going to hold up a quote from what I think is a 1990s TV show. I'm going to show that I don't actually know this TV show as well as I should. But this is the quote. I've got to hold this close to my chest, otherwise it will disappear. With the background. The truth is out there, it says. And the answers are coming in quite quickly. What's the TV show and who said it? Don't think this one's a big mystery. X-Files Mulder. What's his first name? There we go. Well done, Tom. Fox Mulder and X-Files. And I found this as an interesting quote to introduce this session, because I think in the show, the truth is out there is supposed to have two meanings, at least two meanings. One is the fact that the truth is out there to be found. The second is that the truth is out there. It's somewhere in the margins. It's out there in the hard to find places where you'll get the most interesting truths. And I thought that was quite interesting for the session today. When thinking about Scrappy research and bootstrapping, the first thought on that the truth is out there is that there's so much information in so many different formats, online, video, text, in all sorts of different places. There are so many people talking about so many things in many accessible places. So the truth is out there in terms of there's lots of stuff to learn from, but also in the same way, the truth is out there in terms of a lot of the interesting stuff is living there in the margins or in the parallel worlds or the unexpected places. And that's actually what makes this kind of Scrappy research approach, I think, really interesting. Isn't that it's quicker and more cost effective, although that's a great bonus. It allows you to be more agile. It's this thought that simply that you get to a more interesting place. And this gets me to my second thing I was going to share with you guys. Does anybody know what one of these is called? Slinky, absolutely. Now, without Googling, does anybody know when the Slinky was actually invented? What year? Without Googling. It's quite a crazy one. 1972, no. 50-something, no. 30-something, no. 20-something, no. Nobody's even got the decade right yet. Bit of a challenge one. 1940 is the closest so far. It's actually 1943. And apparently the guy who invented it was trying to make things for ways of making machines that are operating at sea so they could operate because they would keep their balance. And he accidentally dropped a bunch of these, and instead of just falling to the floor, they went down like this and stepped down. And it's become one of the biggest selling toys of all time. So there's something interesting there in the idea of serendipity as well. But just this idea of stretch, basically, you know, it's a bit gratuitous to use this, but just this idea of thinking of the Scrappy research, not just as a way of being more agile, but being more stretchy and adding stretch in terms of the places that we're looking for insight and the kind of insights that we can get to. These are, people are asking, you know, get them as present. They're available at very reasonable rates, apparently, online. Right, so that's the kind of the core thought. And what I wanted to do was just share with you a couple of examples on what we're trying to do today. Is in your breakout sessions, I'll explain in a minute, I want you to think about a particular challenge and think about the stretchy places you can go to get research and insights in new and interesting places that's scrappy and agile, but also stretchy. Now, I'm going to talk through two examples that I'm familiar with. I'm not going to ask people what this is. It is a clock, but there's a project about time. This is an example of quite an esoteric question from a project where the question was, what does time mean to people, and what does it mean to give time back to people, which is an interesting kind of question. You can go and talk to consumers about that. But we started thinking about, you know, what are the interesting places you could go to where people talk about time in an interesting way that, you know, gets you to new and interesting places. So within that, we started thinking about gap years and gap year blogs and people taking time out from college and work. That's an interesting place. When people are taking some time out from what they normally do, what can you learn from that? Bucket lists and people writing bucket lists. What do they put into bucket lists and why when they're thinking about what they want to do with their lives? Retirees and people transitioning from working to non-working lives, and they're reevaluating their time in all sorts of new and interesting ways. And during that research, we even sort of thought about terminal illness and terminal illness blogs, which I know is a very sad thing, but again, people reevaluating what time means to them in a very specific situation. So that's a kind of an esoteric example, I think, but hopefully it's a good example of demonstrating this principle of you can go to new and interesting places to get insight and not directly just go to mainstream consumers and ask them questions about what they think. I've got another example here, which is a bit more sort of mainstream, perhaps. This is a jar of jackfruit. So can anybody, well, can really, put a +1 in the chat if you've had jackfruit or have started eating jackfruit recently as more of a plant-based diet. It's certainly, wow, that's going off. So it's certainly something that's featured in my diet a bit more recently, because I gave up meat a few years ago. I still eat fish, pescatarian. I got a -1 from somebody. Does that mean, yeah, definitely not. But you can do all sorts of different, I'm sure somebody put a -1 in there on purpose. You can do all sorts of interesting things with this, like one of the ones I like was the aromatic crispy duck from a Chinese. You can actually do a version of that with jackfruit. So if anybody's got any interesting, which you started to do, jackfruit recipes for everybody, stick them into the chat as well. But again, thinking about plant diets, and innovations in plant, for instance, where could we go to for interesting insights there? So you might want to start talking to or going to places where people are talking about vegan diets, which is very plant-based, obviously, but you can go to the flexitarian diets and people talking about how they're mixing it in with other things. You can go to nutritionists to get a more expert point of view. You can go to fitness trainers perhaps and see how plant relates to fitness. You can watch Game Changers and capture some insights from the Netflix show Game Changers, which was all about the role of plant-based foods and those kind of things. You could go into the worlds of farming and agriculture and get some insights from the industry side. And that's just a few thoughts on that. So I know all these principles aren't kind of new, this idea of stretchy research, but I think what you can say is it's quite difficult to build them into traditional research with traditional budgets, and your budgets and timings can start stretching all out all over the place. Whereas I think with flexi kind of bootstrapping research, when you're just saying, what can I do in a practical, pragmatic way that doesn't take a lot of budget, lots of little dips into lots of little diverse places to get to interesting things, and then connecting them together is a really interesting way of thinking about things. So that was the main thought. And the main focus we want you to do in your breakouts really is just to take that principle forward, apply it into a little case study that we've thought of as a bit of a challenge, but just have a chat about it, have some ideas, chat around them, chat some principles. of this. So we thought, as a bit of an example, we'd go for a mood food brand. Imagine you're doing some research for a mood food brand. And when you're thinking about mood food, it's food that can obviously change your sort of mental mind state and positivity. So it could be about sort of general positivity. It could be about mood and emotion. It could be about digging into the worlds of mental health. But what are the places you can dig into that might help you with the world of mood food? So for instance, just to give you an example, let's think about motivational speakers. Let's go and watch some motivational speakers presentations and see what we can learn for that as an example. Yeah, people have said I kind of cheated. It really isn't slides, I promise. But yeah, so think mood food, and yeah, go off into your groups. And I think you're going to get a full explanation on what to do. I'm not the best one on logistics, so I'll leave it up to you guys as how to run it in your groups. But you're going to get some guidance from the people in your groups on how to look at that mood food example. Think about the different spaces that you would tap into, different areas you research, different ways you would research them. Is it online? Is it watching films? Is it going to visit people? Is it going to do new experiences? How would you bring all that together to do something scrappy and bootstrap that gets you to new and interesting places? Okay, so I was going to hand over to the team to start talking about how we go into groups.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I absolutely loved that. I think that anything that involves props, puppets, slinkies, it's just always worth attending, right? When's the last time you were at a puppet show? I can't think of the last time I was. This was fantastic. So with all that food for thought, we are going to go into breakouts. If you are familiar with Zoom breakouts, you know that sometimes there's a little bit of a lag. We have 160 participants in here right now, which is incredible, but does mean that Zoom might be a little bit slow. So when we push you, if you don't see something pop up right away, don't panic, but you will see a little thing pop up that says join breakout room, whatever number it is. Click join, you'll fly into the breakout room and you'll be greeted, like I said, by a group leader who will give you the next set of instructions. So enjoy the journey, and I will see you back here shortly. I think everyone's back. And it sounds like there were some really exciting conversations that were happening in the breakout rooms. So I want us to talk about that, but we're going to use that as an opening song for one of the sessions that will, come throughout the next 2 days, I promise. So I hope everyone enjoyed their breakouts and the experience wasn't too jarring. Don't worry, we have 2 more sessions throughout the Virtual Insight Summit for you to really get accustomed to the breakout experience. But I want to pass it back over to Jonathan, to the group leads, to bring everyone back together for the last 15 minutes and really wrap this up.
Yes, thank you. I mean, hopefully everybody had a good discussion in their group. I know we did. Next 10 minutes, I think, is just an opportunity for people to share what they talked about. Any highlights, but also any questions or thoughts on the experience would be welcome as well. Hopefully, with that in mind, we'll see people who are putting their virtual hands up, and somebody other than me using their technology to invite them to take part. I'm not entirely sure how this bit works, apologies. But yes, anybody like to go first and start talking about their group?
Julio has his hand up. Why don't he go first?
This is my trick, so I don't have to repeat anything if I go first. Our group had a whole bunch of really cool ideas. The first thing is we were anchored on the fact that this all goes around feelings, and with that we had things like social listening, but not in the traditional way necessarily or exclusively, but rather in other ways, like what's trending, right? So that like feta cheese pasta dish or whatever that like blew up globally, like that type of stuff. We also talked about things like talking to experts, and those experts not necessarily just being food scientists, but also like yoga leaders or nutritionists or even religious leaders as well. We also had a great idea about vending machines and observing what people buy at vending machines in different situations. So for example, in colleges or healthcare professionals where they work. And then somebody else added that there's cultural nuance to it as well. So there's nostalgia associated with, kind of like wellness. So trying to understand what people buy in different parts of the world was another key one. What else do we have? Oh, we also had Googling, like just Google, things that are associated with mental health and with wellness. So I'll stop there. We had more ideas, but I don't want to like steal them away from everybody.
Thank you. Good stuff. Anybody like to go next?
See Tom's hand up.
Thanks, Ariel. So our group had a really good discussion. I think one thing that really kind of came out is the kind of just taking yourself and burying yourself in the community. So whether that's people that are talking about mental health or people that are talking about food, or kind of hitting that sweet spot in the middle. So go into kind of social media and finding influencers that are talking about it and digging into the topics that they're talking about. And like I say, ideally, if you can find that sweet spot of people that are talking about both, and that might be ideal. But also kind of starting with your immediate community, like going to farmers markets, talking to the people at your little league groups or local sports team and stuff like that. So using those kind of immediate contacts of yours, and really getting into that community to ask questions. And then there was some other interesting points. So kind of taking it a step back actually and digging into what's the kind of the problem people are trying to solve. So visiting like mental health charity sites and kind of finding out, well, are people struggling with anxiety, or are they trying to find solutions to sleep better or have more energy? And then kind of going from there and working out, well, actually, now we know the problem people have. Here's a food that can kind of boost that mood or help people sleep better, and kind of coming up with solutions from that. So that was us.
Great stuff.
So thank you to my group. We had so many ideas going, but I think a great idea was to step one back from food and move food to mood, and talk about to therapists and to people who understand the language of it and the emotions of it, and understand actually what is mood, what triggers, what effect it can have on people, and then build up from there. We also talked about going to places where it was we just talked about very positively with influencers and blogging groups and communities online, and then thinking as well about places where food might impact mood negatively, and places like food deserts where the relationship to food is more complicated, and understanding those relationships in order to really understand the space and not just look at some communities. There was also great ideas for sort of global research, so looking at communities and how people post about food at different times and what that means to them, and are they posting late at night, are they posting in the middle of the day, and what that might say as well. So yeah, thank you to my group. It was really lovely to talk with you all.
Oh yeah, we had a really interesting discussion, and we ended on a really good notion from Braden that just doing this exercise reminded us that sometimes we need to take our work hats off and look for answers in the same way that we might do in our personal lives. So like Julio said, we would Google it. I also let people know that even doctors Google things. I've been in our doctor's office and found where they've just done a little search. So bear that in mind. If Google's good enough for your doctor, it's probably good enough for you. In terms of areas we might find some inspiration, we talked a lot about the relationship between different physical stimuli and our mood. So be it music, what we wear, color therapy, aroma, comedy, just trying to understand, the things that we react to and figure out what sort of mood that's eliciting, and anyone in those different areas that could help us understand the relationship between mood and physical stimuli. And then the other topic we talked about was also the really strong link between physical well-being and mental well-being. And so whether it's yoga instructors or mental health therapists, dietitians, anyone who could help give us an understanding of what it is about whether our exercise or what we put into our body and how that affects our mood.
See a few more hands up. Ashley, do you want to talk about what happened in your group?
Yeah, so I had a great group. They had some really, really interesting ideas, kind of starting out really, really broad. So thinking about things like spiritual healing and those things that might be a little more metaphysical. So taking it all the way from the supernatural end of the spectrum to see how that kind of correlates to the more natural world. So thinking about foods and the things that we put in our bodies, and really digging into, maybe interviewing some people, talking to folks that are really seeking out that kind of support or help, and understanding, what impact it's having on them and what they're trying to solve for. Another thing that my group thought of was interacting with people during the extremes. So maybe at a festival where they're in an extremely like happy or heightened state, all the way to finding people in circumstances that are a completely different mindset and seeing how that changes their interaction and their perception of food. And then as far as finding that information, one of the things I loved so much was go back to the research you already have with a different lens, especially if you've done work around the food category. It's super emotional. So maybe you weren't looking for that nugget before, but it doesn't mean it isn't there. And we got Google as well, which I also think is brilliant. So great group. And it was a really interesting conversation.
Katie, oh yeah, go for it, Emma.
Yep. So yeah, a lot of those things as well. So I think we spoke about it from two different angles. One, what gives us joy and what brings us a good mood, and also what are we struggling with, and how can we get out of that struggle, right? So the way that kind of two lenses. We spoke about music as well, mood playlists on Spotify, traveling and holidays. That's what people are looking forward to, and just like what brings us in the better mood. Like some interesting things as well, like we could talk to chefs and nutritionists who create meals for extreme circumstances like the NASA or the military, just to know what kind of food they use to bring the mood up. And also, like, is it a matter of ingredients on the food? Is it a matter of presentation? So of course we did speak as well about social media, Clubhouse, LinkedIn, but also Pinterest. People create a lot of mood boards, literally mood boards. So where they show what they enjoy the most, what they're wishing for, even things like TED Talks that talk a bit about this, give a more in-depth information about it. And yeah, feel good films. What do we want to have when we want to be in a good mood? Ice cream. So tap a little bit onto different case scenarios like that.
Any more hands up? I still don't know how to see that, by the way, I'm afraid.
There's a few. It looks like Katie Sweet has her hand up.
Yeah, my group was great as well. We covered a lot of ground. So I'll just touch on a few. One was looking at academic literature and what professionals in this area are saying about what boosts mood. We talked about talking to people in different spaces in their life to see what their needs around emotional positivity and mental health were. So like teachers and professors and students, employees in companies, the people in HR or people functions who think about this all day long, like Tom Hollis at Scrappy. They have an interesting perspective on all of this. We got social media as well, Instagram influencers, what they're talking about, what products they're pitching. Just going to old school Google, just magazines and what people are talking about around this in print rather than digital. Those were some of our highlights that haven't been covered.
Awesome. I see a couple more hands. Charlie?
Yeah, I think a lot of what has already been said was covered in our group as well. Google Trends is one that came up. I like the idea of getting mood experts and food experts together to talk. That's something that came up that was a really good one. Then just things that are publicly available, podcasts about mindfulness, Clubhouse groups, things like that. And then look at extreme users. Like, you might find people that might be right at the cutting edge of a trend and kind of focus in on what they're doing and how that could impact the brand and the product.
Sweet. Well, I'm conscious of the time. I know there's a few groups that didn't share out, but we do have the ability to keep the conversation going over in the Cadence platform. And I want to give Jonathan a couple minutes to wrap us up before we hop over into the next part of the day, which I'll tell you about after we conclude this.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for everybody for taking part and all your enthusiasm. There's some fantastic things people came up with there. Some really interesting, some really stretchy, but some other things that are really kind of close in, but when you think about them, you can do them in a slightly different way, and it's very exciting. Going back to the start of this, the quote at the start was the truth is out there. I think what I learned from that exercise is there's so many things out there that, even if you've been working in this space a lot of the time, that people will come up with new things when you start thinking of it in different ways. And then there's lots out there, but then there is lots of really stretchy stuff that people think of and get you to new and interesting places. So I think it really emphasizes for me this idea that the scrappy research isn't just about agile, it's about doing things differently and getting to interesting places. And my hope is that that principle, you know, can be applied in small ways in everyday situations in people's research lives. So it doesn't necessarily mean abandoning all of our traditional research methodologies, but perhaps just putting in a little dose of this scrappy research alongside or in the way that we do our traditional research. So just wanted, as we sort of transition to the next group, the next session, for just people just to take a moment to think about what is something that you're going to be doing over the next 2 weeks that you could do slightly differently on the basis of this. It doesn't have to be a major change, and sometimes these small changes are great, but is there anything that you would do slightly different? So if you can take a moment to pause and think about that and write it down. We're not going to be sharing those back, so it's just something that you guys can do as we finish this section and move into the next session. So thank you very much, and hopefully that's interesting and helpful for people as they go forward over the next few weeks and months.